Nobody in that room knew they were insulting the most powerful man on earth. The chandeliers in the Rivera mansion burned bright the night of the family banquet. Crystal glasses clinked. Silk dresses whispered against marble floors. Waiters moved like shadows between tables draped in white linen, and the whole place smelled of imported wine and old money. It was exactly the kind of night the Riveras lived for, a performance of wealth staged so perfectly that even the guests forgot it was a show. I made a promise to my mom to get to 1,000 subscription before Easter. Please me make my dream come true by hitting the subscribe button, like and comment where you're watching. Thank you. Ethan Cole sat at the far end of the long dinner table, slightly apart from the others as he always was. He wore a plain black shirt, no tie, no watch, no jewelry. His hands were folded in his lap. His face was calm, so calm it almost looked like absence. Like he wasn't really there. To his right sat his wife, Elena Rivera Cole, beautiful and composed in a wine-red dress, her dark hair swept back, her jaw set in a way that told anyone who cared to look that she was bracing for something. She knew what was coming. He always knew. Victor just closed the Murano deal, Elena's uncle Hector announced from across the table, swirling his glass. 42 million. In 2 weeks. He didn't look at Ethan when he said it, but everyone else did. That was the point. Victor Rivera, 29, square-jawed, with the kind of confidence that expensive boarding schools print into boys like stamps, smiled and lifted his glass. It wasn't hard, he said. When you actually work, results come. He let the word work float in the air just long enough for everyone to know exactly where it was aimed. Laughter moved around the table like a wave. Elena's mother pressed her napkin to her mouth. Her father looked at the ceiling. And Ethan just reached for his water glass and took a slow sip. Maybe next time Ethan can contribute something, Victor added, smiling. Moral support perhaps. More laughter. Louder this time. Ethan set his glass down. His expression didn't change. Not a flicker. Not a twitch. Elena reached under the table and put her hand on his, and he turned to look at her. Just for a second, and something passed between them. Something the rest of the table was not invited to see. He contributes plenty, Elena said, her voice quiet but sharp as a blade. The laughter stopped. Victor raised an eyebrow. Was he? I must have missed it. Nobody defended Ethan. Nobody ever did except her. Later that night, Ethan stood alone on the east balcony, looking out at the city lights spread below the Rivera estate like a map of everything the family thought they owned. The night air was cool against his skin. His posture was easy, relaxed. The posture of a man with no worries, which was exactly what made the silence around him feel like a held breath. He heard the conversation before he meant to. 2 of Elena's aunts just inside the glass doors, voices low but careless. She married down. Everyone knows it. He's a burden. No job, no connections, no ambition. I don't know how she bears it. She'll see it eventually. The Rivera name deserves better than a ghost. Ethan did not move. He listened to the whole thing. And then, for the first time in a very long time, something shifted behind his eyes. Something quiet and final, like a door closing in a house that has been empty for years. He pulled out his phone. Pressed a contact that appeared only as a single letter. The line connected on the first ring. "Sir," said the voice on the other end. It was the voice of a man who did not waste words. "Activate Phase 1, Ethan said. The Empire moves." Pause. Brief and almost reverent. "Understood, sir. We begin tonight." Ethan ended the call and stood there for another moment looking at the city. Then he put the phone back in his pocket and went inside to find his wife. He had not always been Ethan Cole, the quiet husband with no job and no story. That was a name he had chosen the way some men choose disguises. Carefully, deliberately, with a purpose that had nothing to do with hiding and everything to do with testing. His real name was Ethan Cole Voss. And 11 years ago, at the age of 23, he had walked away from the largest privately held empire in the world. The Voss Empire did not appear in any Forbes list. It had no headquarters with a name on the door, no press releases, no publicly traded stock. It existed in the gaps between the companies that people did know, in the finance firms that moved money between governments, in the logistics networks that kept global supply chains alive, in the technology companies that built the invisible architecture the modern world ran on. The Voss empire was not a company. It was a system. And it had been in Ethan's family for 3 generations. His father, Marcus Voss, had built the modern version of it from the wreckage of his own father's more modest operation, and he had done it with a kind of cold precision that left bodies, not literal ones mostly, but careers ended, companies absorbed, men broken and reduced to silence. Marcus Voss believed that power was a zero-sum game, and that mercy was a form of stupidity. Ethan had refused to inherit it that way. The argument between them had lasted 3 years. It ended the morning Ethan walked out of the Voss estate in Geneva with a single bag and a new identity and a plan that his father called madness and that Ethan called something else entirely. He wanted to know who he was without the empire. He wanted to be tested without the shield of infinite money and inherited authority. He wanted to live as a real man lives. Not a Voss, not a heir, just a person. And he had done it. For 7 years he had lived quietly, worked small jobs, rented modest apartments. He had learned things he never would have learned inside the gilded machinery of the Voss estate. He had learned patience, humility, the weight of a normal life. He had also learned, somewhere in the middle of all of it, what it felt like to love someone who didn't know your last name. He had met Elena at a small art exhibit in the city 4 years ago. She was standing in front of a painting she clearly didn't like, frowning at it with her arms crossed, and he had walked over and asked her why she was frowning at art she could have just walked away from. She'd looked at him like he was either rude or interesting and hadn't decided which. He had made her laugh inside of 10 minutes. They had talked for 3 hours. He had never told her about Voss. He had meant to tell her. Many times. He had opened the conversation in his head 1,000 different ways. But time passed and the truth became heavier and she became more important, and somehow the longer he waited the more impossible it felt. She loved him as Ethan Cole. A plain man. A nobody. He was terrified of what she would do with the rest. So he stayed quiet. And he watched the Rivera family treat him like furniture. And he endured it because it was the cost of what he had built with her. Until the night of the banquet. Until the ants on the balcony. Until he decided that enduring was finished. 3 days after the banquet, the Rivera family crisis began without warning, as crises usually do. It started with a phone call to Elena's father at 6 in the morning, before anyone was dressed or fed or ready. By 7, the family's senior partners were in the main office. By 8, the news had reached even the household staff, moving through the estate in whispers. The Rivera Group's anchor project, a massive commercial development deal worth $300 million, 7 years in the making, had collapsed. The lead investor group had pulled out overnight, citing undisclosed internal concerns. The banks that had agreed to co-fund the project were now reviewing their positions. Within hours, 2 of them had formally declined to continue. The third was making noises that suggested it would follow. By noon, Grandmother Rivera had called a family meeting. She sat at the head of the conference table the way she always sat, back straight, hands folded, face carrying the particular blankness of a woman who has survived many disasters and intends to survive this one. She was 74 years old and she had run this family like a military operation since her husband's death 20 years ago. He did not panic. She assessed. "We have 60 days before the project debt becomes critical," she said. "During that window we need a fresh capital injection of no less than $100 million. Whoever secures that funding, and I mean secures it, signed, sealed, delivered, will be announced as my successor and take formal leadership of the Rivera Group." The room was very quiet for a moment. Then Victor leaned forward. "I'll do it. Give me the 60 days. I have connections. The Murano deal opened doors. I can bring in the capital." He looked across the table at Elena when he said it. The look wasn't hostile. It was something worse, dismissive. Like she was already eliminated from the race before it started. Elena said nothing. She was looking at her grandmother, reading the old woman's face, trying to find something in it. Encouragement maybe. Or at least openness. She found neither. That night she told Ethan about it in the kitchen, sitting across from him at the small table they used for every meal because it was the only space in the whole enormous house that felt like theirs. She told him the whole thing flat and factual, the way she told him difficult things. No tears, no drama, just the facts laid out clean so they could look at them together. Ethan listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You should compete," he said. She looked at him. "I have no investor. I have no lead. Victor has a 2-week head start and a network I can't match right now." Ethan looked at her steadily. "Trust me," he said. "Enter the race. You won't lose." She searched his face. She had always been good at reading people. It was one of the things that made her effective in business. But Ethan had always been the one person who seemed to exist at a depth she couldn't quite reach. She had loved that about him once. Now, in the low light of their kitchen, she wasn't sure what to call it. "You sound very sure," she said. He gave her the small, quiet smile she had fallen in love with. "I am," he said. "Enter the race, Elena." She did. What happened next, the Rivera family would not fully understand for weeks. The machinery of it was too large, too quiet, too precisely engineered to be visible to people who were only looking at the surface. Ethan moved carefully. He had spent 7 years being invisible, and visibility was still not something he wanted. Not yet. But he was done being passive. The first bank that had declined the Rivera Group was called Meridian Capital Partners. It was a mid-sized institution privately held with a board of 9 directors. Within 72 hours of Ethan's phone call to M, a series of investment vehicles, none of them traceable to any individual, none of them flying a flag that anyone would recognize, had quietly purchased controlling interest in Meridian through proxy holdings. The board did not understand what had happened. They knew only that the ownership structure had changed. And the new ownership had sent a single instruction: review the Rivera Group application. The second bank followed within a week. Victor, meanwhile, was building what he believed was an airtight deal. He had a group of European investors he'd cultivated through the Murano connection. 5 firms, collectively promising $80 million, with the remaining 20 coming from a domestic fund that a business school friend managed. It was real money. Real signatures. He had reason to feel confident. What he did not know was that the European Investment Group's lead firm had recently become a portfolio holding of a logistics conglomerate headquartered in Singapore. And that conglomerate was part of a network that answered ultimately to a single office in Geneva. Ethan did not pull Victor's deal apart immediately. He let it stand. He let Victor celebrate. That was important. The timing of things mattered enormously when you were rearranging a chessboard that your opponent thought was still his game. Victor threw a small dinner for his allies 2 weeks in, and declared the funding as good as secured. He sent a text to Elena that read simply, "You should start thinking about what you'll do after." She didn't respond. She was busy. A week before the deadline, Elena received a phone call from a woman named Sable. The name meant nothing to her. The firm Sable represented, Carver Strategic Holdings, also meant nothing to her. Elena almost didn't take the meeting. But the woman on the phone said something that made her pause. "The Empire supports you, Ms. Rivera. Please come." The offices of Carver Strategic Holdings occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in the financial district. There was no logo on the building. The elevator required a card. The reception area had no name on the wall, only a single piece of art, a very old map of the world framed in black. When Elena walked in, the CEO was already standing to greet her. He was in his 60s, silver-haired, dressed with the quiet precision of a man who had never needed to impress anyone. He smiled when he saw her. It was the smile of someone greeting a person they already knew. "Ms. Rivera Cole," he said. The use of both names registered. "Thank you for coming." They sat. Coffee appeared without being ordered. And then the CEO laid out an offer so clean and so enormous that Elena spent 3 seconds wondering if she was being deceived. $500 million. No interest. No equity stake. No board seats. No reporting requirements. No conditions attached to deployment. The Rivera Group would receive the funds as a bridge investment with a 5-year flexible repayment window. "This is not a standard offer," Elena said carefully. "No," the CEO agreed. "It isn't. Who is behind this?" He smiled again. "The Empire," he said. That's all I'm authorized to say today. Elena stared at him. That's not a satisfying answer. No, he agreed again. It isn't. But the money is real and it is yours and the terms are exactly as I've stated. You'll have the term sheet by end of day. He paused. Take it to your grandmother. She'll understand what it means. Elena left that meeting feeling like she'd stepped through a door into a room that didn't follow the rules of the house she thought she lived in. The day of the final family presentation arrived on a Tuesday morning, gray and overcast, the kind of sky that feels like a held breath. Victor presented first. He walked to the front of the conference room with his laptop and his charts and his practiced ease, and he laid out his deal in careful order. 80 million from the European Consortium, 20 million from the domestic fund. Total capital, 100 million. Timeline, 30 days to close. He was confident. He had earned the right to be confident. He was still talking when his phone buzzed. He ignored the first buzz. And the second. On the third he glanced down just for a second and something moved across his face. A flicker. A shadow. He kept talking. His phone buzzed again. And again. And then the phone of one of his allies across the table buzzed. And another. The room began to feel it. The way a room feels when something is wrong before anyone has said so. Victor stopped mid-sentence. He looked at his phone. The lead firm of his European consortium had sent a single-line communication. We are withdrawing from this engagement effective immediately, due to a change in portfolio direction. He refreshed. 3 more firms had sent similar messages. The fourth had sent nothing. Its phone lines were now routing to voicemail. The domestic fund was next. His business school contact texted him personally. I'm so sorry. I don't understand what's happening. The fund has been placed under new management as of this morning and all pending commitments are frozen. Victor stood at the front of the room with his charts on the screen behind him and his deal dissolving in real time in his hand, and the silence around the table was the most complete silence Elena had ever heard. Then Grandmother Rivera said quietly, Elena. Elena stood. She placed a single document on the table, the term sheet from Carver Strategic Holdings signed and countersigned with the wire confirmation attached. $500 million. Already in motion. Already real. The room did not make a sound for a very long time. Victor recovered enough to try. That was the thing about men like Victor. They always tried one more move even when the board was gone. Where did this money come from? He asked, his voice controlled, pointed. A firm nobody has heard of? How do we know this is legitimate? How do we know she isn't being set up? Grandmother Rivera looked at the document for a long time. Then she looked at her granddaughter. And something moved behind the old woman's eyes that Elena had never quite seen there before. The money is in our accounts, Elena said. The wire cleared this morning. You can call our CFO and confirm it in the next 60 seconds. Someone did call. The confirmation came back in 45 seconds. Victor sat down. In the days that followed, Elena found herself pulling at threads. She was good at that, at following a thing back to its source. And the source of this was bothering her in a way she couldn't name. Firm. The CEO's smile. The way he had said her full name, Rivera Cole, before she had introduced herself. He thought about Ethan. She thought about the way he had said, trust me. You won't lose. Not I hope you won't lose. Not I believe in you. You won't lose. Present tense. Certainty. She thought about his composure the night of the banquet. The way he had not reacted not once to anything Victor said. Like a man watching a movie he had already seen. She thought about his phone call on the balcony. She hadn't seen it, hadn't heard it. But she had noticed the morning after the banquet that he had left their bedroom at 2 a.m. and come back an hour later. And when she asked where he had gone he had said simply, needed some air. And she had believed him because she always believed him and she was starting to wonder if that was a mistake. 3 weeks after the deal closed, at a charity gala Elena had nearly skipped, Ethan was recognized. It happened fast, the way things happen when they've been inevitable for a long time. They were standing near the bar, Elena talking to a city councilwoman, Ethan quiet at her side as usual, when a man across the room spotted him. The man was 50 or so, European in a charcoal suit, And when he saw Ethan, his face changed in a way that was hard to miss. He crossed the room quickly. And before anyone could react, he leaned close to Ethan and said in a voice that was meant to be quiet but wasn't quite. "Sir. The Empire is fully under your command. Geneva confirms. The expansion is complete." The people closest to them heard it. Elena heard it. The man looked up, realized what he had done, and went rigid with visible panic. Ethan put a hand briefly on the man's shoulder and said something too low for anyone else to catch. The man nodded, stepped back, and vanished into the crowd. Ethan turned around. Elena was looking at him. "Old acquaintance," he said. "He works in finance. He gets enthusiastic about his projects." He said it easily. Philly. He met her eyes without flinching. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. "Right," she said. She didn't ask another question that night. But something had shifted. She could feel it. A new weight in the air between them, faint but unmistakable, like the pressure that comes before a storm. Victor moved next. Of course he did. He had spent 3 weeks gathering information. Fragments, rumors, things he'd pulled from contacts in the financial world. Whispers about Carver Strategic Holdings, about the names behind the firms that had bought out his investor groups. About a man no one could fully source who seemed to appear at the edges of every major transaction that had touched the Rivera group in the past month. He organized a public event. A shareholder meeting for one of the Rivera family's subsidiary companies, where guests from across the business community would be present. He planned to stand up in front of that room and name Ethan Cole as a fraud, a planted operative, a con man who had married into the family under false pretenses, who was manipulating Elena and the entire Rivera group for purposes that Victor had not yet fully identified but that he was certain were sinister. He had prepared a presentation. He had witnesses. He had 3 lawyers in the room. He stood up. He began. He had gotten 3 sentences out when the doors at the back of the room opened. 4 men in suits walked in. They were followed by a woman in her 40s with the bearing of someone who does not knock. Behind her, a man Elena recognized from the cover of a European financial magazine. And behind him, quietly, unhurried, Ethan. The woman spoke first. She introduced herself as the chief legal officer of a holding company whose name made 3 people in the room sit up straighter. She stated clearly, in the precise language of someone who spent her days in courtrooms, that Mr. Victor Rivera's claims were defamatory, that they contained no factual foundation, that her client's identity and business history were both verified and entirely legitimate, and that Victor could either sit down or prepare for consequences that would take years to untangle. Victor's lawyers were leaning to whisper in his ear before she finished the second sentence. Victor sat down. The Rivera family fractured as families do, along the lines that had always been there but that comfort had covered over. Elena's parents came to her separately. Her father was diplomatic. He said he was proud of her, that the deal was impressive, but that there were questions about her husband that the family needed answered. Her mother was less diplomatic. She sat across from Elena in the garden and said that whatever Ethan was hiding, it was too big, and that big secrets in marriages meant bad things, and that Elena needed to think very carefully about where her loyalties lay. "My loyalty," Elena said, "is to the truth." "The truth," her mother said, "is that your husband is not who he told you he was." Elena did not answer, because she was starting to believe the same thing. She went home that evening and sat across from Ethan at their small kitchen table, and she did not make the coffee and she did not speak for a long moment. Then she looked at him and said simply, "Tell me." Ethan looked at her for a long time. The calmness he always carried was still there, but underneath it, she could see it now, maybe for the first time, something that looked a lot like fear. Not the fear of a man who has been caught. The fear of a man who is about to lose something he cannot replace. "If I tell you," he said, "everything changes." "Everything has already changed," she said. "I just don't have the words for it yet." He nodded very slowly. "Then I'll give you the words." But before he could begin, the world moved faster than he did. The press conference had been called by Grandmother Rivera as a formal announcement of the new family leadership. It was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in the Grand Hall of the Rivera Group headquarters, with media invited, partners notified, family present in full. It was meant to be a moment of controlled formality, the kind of public declaration the Rivera family was practiced at delivering. Did not go as planned. Victor arrived with a different agenda. He had spent the previous 48 hours in motion, contacting journalists, feeding them fragments, trying to force a narrative into the public space before Ethan could contain it. He had sent one reporter a photograph, Ethan at the charity gala, speaking to the man who had called him sir. He had sent another a document, a financial filing that traced one of Carver's Strategic Holdings' parent companies back through 7 shell layers to a Geneva holding group. He could not trace it all the way. But he had gotten close enough. He stood in the back of the grand hall as the press conference began, his arms crossed, waiting for his moment. Elena stood at the front with her grandmother. The announcement was coming. Grandmother Rivera opened her mouth to speak. And the doors opened. Not the main doors. All the doors. Simultaneously. They came in quietly, the way truly powerful people always move, without urgency, without spectacle, without any need to announce themselves, because their presence was itself the announcement. There were perhaps 20 of them. Men and women from 4 continents. People whose names appeared in the kind of news that happened at the level of governments and world markets. A former head of state. The CEO of a company that built the infrastructure half the world's internet ran on. A logistics magnate whose ships moved a fifth of global freight. A woman who had advised 3 different central banks. They filled the room. They did not sit. They stood calmly and they looked at a single point in the space. They looked at Ethan. Ethan had been standing against the side wall as he always stood, slightly apart, slightly back, the invisible husband. Now, as the room registered what was happening, as the cameras turned and the journalists leaned forward and the Rivera family members looked at each other with faces going pale one by one, he stepped away from the wall. He walked to the front of the room. He stood beside Elena. The man who had been his father's right hand. A man named Crane, 70 years old, who had served the Voss Empire since before Ethan was born, stepped forward from the group and bowed his head. A small gesture. Precise. Unmistakable. The empire stands with its king, Crane said. It was enough. The silence that followed was the kind that rewrites rooms. Victor made one last attempt. He said loudly into the silence, "This is theater. This is a show. None of this is real. Whoever these people are, they're..." Victor. The voice that interrupted him was not loud. Didn't need to be. It was Ethan's voice, and something in it had changed, or had always been there and been hidden like a frequency just outside hearing range. "Sit down." Victor sat down. He did not fully understand why. But he sat. Ethan turned to face the room. He did not look at the cameras. He looked at Elena. "Elena Rivera Cole is the rightful leader of the Rivera Group," he said. "She earned it without knowing she had help. She made the decisions. She took the meeting. She stood in front of your grandmother and put the deal on the table. The only thing I did was make sure the doors were open. She's the one who walked through them." He turned to face the wider room then. "The Voss Empire is real. It controls more than most of you in this room are aware of. It will continue to operate as it always has, quietly, globally, without spectacle. What changes today is that it publicly supports the Rivera Group's leadership under Elena. Any company, any partner, any financial institution that has concerns about the Rivera Group's future is welcome to bring those concerns to Carver Strategic Holdings, whose contact information is on record." He paused. "I don't expect many concerns." No one laughed. But the man from the European financial magazine almost smiled. Grandmother Rivera stood perfectly still at the front of the room, and Elena watched her grandmother's face go through something she had never seen it go through before. A complete loss of control. Not collapse, nothing so simple. More like the moment a tightly held structure recognizes it is no longer the largest thing in the room. The old woman looked at Ethan. Then she looked at her granddaughter. Then she said to no one in particular, very quietly, "Well." Victor's investments unraveled in a way that felt almost gentle, which made it worse. Not a dramatic implosion. No fraud charges, no headlines about scandal. Just a slow, steady withdrawal of support from every direction, as the companies he'd relied on quietly reviewed their positions and found reasons to go elsewhere. His European contacts stopped returning calls. His business school friends fund under new management declined to renew the business relationship. Within 6 weeks, the deals that had made him the shining star of the family were gone, and in their place was a resume that looked exactly like what it was. A man who had mistaken borrowed access for personal power. He left the estate quietly. Elena did not stop him. She did not pursue him. She simply let him go and moved forward. 3 other family members who had been loudest in their treatment of Ethan found over the following months that their peripheral business interest had quietly been absorbed into larger entities, their vendor contracts not renewed, their informal arrangements with family-adjacent firms concluded without drama. Nobody threatened them. Nobody explained. The empire did not need to explain. 3 nights after the press conference, Ethan finally told Elena everything. Not the compressed version he'd given the room. The real one. The Geneva estate. His father. The 7 years. The decision to live as nobody. The moment he'd met her at the art exhibit. Every conversation he'd constructed in his head about telling her the truth, and every reason he had found to postpone it. Elena listened to all of it. She did not interrupt. She did not look away. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. The kitchen was very still. Outside, the city moved and breathed and lit itself up, indifferent to the thing happening in this small room. You let them call you useless, she said. For years. Yes. You let my family treat you like you were nothing. Yes. She looked at her hands on the table. Why didn't you just tell me? At the beginning. When it was small enough to hold. He looked at her, and it was the most open she had ever seen his face. All the calm stripped away, and underneath it, just a man. Because you loved me without it, he said. And I was terrified that with it you'd love me differently. Or not at all. Elena looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "You're an idiot." He blinked. "A genuinely spectacular idiot," she said. "With a global empire and no sense whatsoever." Something broke open in the room, not bad, not painful. More like a window being pushed up after long winter. She reached across the table and took his hand. He turned it over and held hers. "I need to know," she said after a while. "All of it. Going forward. No more managed distances. No more letting me walk into rooms you've already secured without telling me. If we're doing this, if I'm leading this family and you're," she gestured, a slight wave of her hand that somehow conveyed the entire concept of a secret global empire, "whatever you are." "Your husband," he said. "That one's still accurate." "Your husband who controls the world's invisible economy," she corrected. "Then we do it together. As equals. Or not at all." He looked at her. And this time the thing that moved behind his eyes was not the quiet satisfaction of a plan completed. It was something warmer and less controlled. "Equals," he said. "Yes." In the weeks that followed, Elena took the chair at the Rivera group and settled into it the way water settles into a container. Completely without fuss, filling every corner. She was decisive where her grandmother had been territorial. She was transparent where Victor had been performative. She made decisions fast and she explained them, and the people around her, even the ones who had doubted her, found themselves trusting the new shape of things. Ethan stood beside her. Not behind her. Not above her. Beside. He attended meetings when she wanted a second read on someone in the room. He made calls when the doors that needed to open were the ones he held keys to. He went home with her at the end of the day and made coffee in the small kitchen and sat across from her at the table they had always used, and it was the same table and the same coffee, and they were somehow, in every way that mattered, different people than they had been 6 months ago. The empire did not announce itself. That was not its nature. It moved the way it had. Always moved, through layers, through silence, through patience measured in years rather than quarters. But its direction had shifted. Ethan had made a choice he hadn't made when he walked away from Geneva at 23. Not to abandon the power but to use it differently. To use it for something. He was still thinking about what exactly that something was. And then on a quiet Thursday evening, Elena came home with a look on her face he didn't recognize. She sat down. She didn't speak for a moment. "What is it?" he said. She looked at him. "Your father called." The room changed. Not the temperature, not the light. Something beneath those things. Ethan's face went very still. "Marcus Voss," she said. "He reached the Rivera Group switchboard and asked for me specifically. By name." She paused. "He said he'd like to meet. He said it's time the families had a conversation. He said," she looked at Ethan steadily, "he said to tell you the empire has 2 heirs, and that you need to discuss what happens to it." The silence stretched between them. Ethan had not spoken to his father in 11 years. He had built the last decade of his life partly in opposition to the man, in proof that there was another way. He had believed, without testing it, that the separation was permanent. That Marcus Voss had accepted the refusal and moved on. He had been wrong about that before. "What do you want to do?" Elena asked. Her voice was careful. Not afraid, she did not do afraid, but precise in a way that told him she understood this was not a small question. Ethan looked at the table between them. At her hands, which were still. At the window beyond her, where the city was doing what cities do. Moving, breathing, full of people who did not know what was about to be decided in this small room. He opened his mouth. End of part 1.